Hey, all you cool cats and kittens. This is Kylie with the Con 308 Big Rescue. It's obviously our last video lecture, so thought it'd be fun. I'm wearing my Joe Exotic t-shirt. If you haven't seen Tiger King, please watch it. Uh, it's crazy. Um, but really today we're going to talk about chapter 15. I don't suspect it'll be very long, but it is nonverbal communication in the modern workplace. So we'll go ahead and get started. Yeah, so, okay, load. So we'll start with general nonverbal communication in organizations. We have two primary perspectives that we focus on when we're interpreting our nonverbal communication while at work. The first is the functionalist, and that focuses on practicality of nonverbal communication. And the second is the critical. So that focuses on the symbolized meaning of nonverbal communication. Critical often stresses how nonverbal communication can marginalize subordinates and/or groups. Okay, so when you're interpreting critical, things that might marginalize, you can tell the difference between a boss and a subordinate just by how they stand, what they wear. I know our classroom is not an organization, but thinking about an organization or think about it as an organization, it could be I dress up to teach and you can wear t-shirts, jeans, sweatpants, whatever you want, right? There's a difference, and that's how we present ourselves. You can see. So these are the symbolized meaning. The functionalist is all about the practicality. So if you walk into your boss's office and they look at you and they give you this look like, what are you doing? That's pretty practical if you're doing something and maybe you shouldn't be doing it, or practical. So that's the functionalist. And so we focus on these within organizations and while at work. With nonverbal communication, we also focus on space, and that can influence attitudes and behaviors while in the organization. So spaces that have more windows can actually increase the happiness of employees, right? Because you can look outside and on nice days you can see it. Sometimes that can be bad though, because you see a really nice day and you're stuck inside at work. But typically it does increase the happiness. Bright neutral colors increase satisfaction. If you come into an office that's dark, the walls are a dark gray, a dark blue, we don't really seem happy or fulfilled. And so that actually decreases our satisfaction. But using bright whites, beiges, maybe a yellow here and there, that can increase satisfaction. Open spaces allow for increased communication. So having an open floor plan rather than an office with a closed door. Um, I'm sure if you visited any of your professors in the Department of Communication, going down to the faculty hallway, they all have their own offices. That doesn't really increase communication unless you come out of your office or keep your door open. However, if you come into the first floor doc office, those first years have a shared office space. So they have their own desk, but it increases communication. You can just turn around and talk to anybody. And then power can also be reflected in space. So each employee is given a certain amount of space within the office. It could be just a desk, it could be based on office size. Are there cubicles? Or is it a closed office that has a door? So thinking about space really helps us interpret power that is reflected in the organization. Territory along with space is another way that we focus on nonverbal communication. So the arrangement and perceptions of space is reflected in territory. So doors reflect status, and there are attitudes that are associated with that status and your workplace territory. So most places have an open door policy. It is preferred. This allows for open and honest communication. Anybody can walk in, anybody can see what you're doing or hear what you're doing. Closed doors, it suggests that employees do prefer privacy over collaboration. So this is less than, I don't want to collaborate with my employees or with other employees. I want to just work on what I'm working on and call it a day. Neither is good or bad. Both just have some pros and cons to each. Personal space is highly valued in organizations. We all like to have our own space. Think about the seat that you sit in, right? I mean, well, when we were sitting in seats, of course. So this personal space is highly valued. That's your space. So leaders are typically permitted more space and subordinates do typically get less. The boss has the office, but the employees might get a desk, right? Um, but sometimes people can violate our personal space, and that can create turbulence. If people are going into your office without permission or the door is closed and they just walk in, that leads to, somebody being upset, and that can possibly lead to conflict. Along with space is time. So, time is very important in American organizations. The primary method through which employees are paid is through time. I mean, we have salary, so you get a yearly salary, but a lot of our employees in America are paid on hourly time schedules. So, you work for 6 hours, you get paid for 6 hours. You don't get paid whether you're there or not. From a communication perspective, time typically represents commitment and dedication. So people who arrive early are perceived as better employees. And we know that that's not true. I personally, time is huge in our department. The time you spend in the office is one of those that, we really pride ourselves on. And me personally, I have high inclusion needs and high FOMO. So I have high fear of missing out. Um, Typically, 9 times out of 10, my office door was open, so I could hear people, so I could interact. Um, but that was bad for me because then I didn't get the work done that I needed to get done. So my biggest thing was I could do more work at home from my couch than I could from my office. Didn't mean I was a bad student or bad employee. It meant that I like to talk. And that's a problem when I'm trying to actually work on something, right? So, we do think that time does represent this commitment and dedication. We think time in the office represents this, but you could be going home and working on things just as long as you would have in the office, right? So it's kind of a give or take there. Touch is pretty big within an organizational community. So it can communicate two important messages. One, status and power. So superiors are going to initiate and control the touch behaviors more often than a subordinate. If you go in for an interview, the interviewers are going to reach out for a handshake. If your boss is telling you you're doing great work, they might reach out for a handshake. But it also has some issues with sex differences. So touching across sexes, so male to female touch, is really perceived negatively at work, and it could be considered sexual harassment. So, when touching at the office, when touching in an organizational situation, you need to be very careful with that with cross-sex differences. Next slide is a housekeeping. We're not doing that. Kinesics. These are the facial expressions, and they are largely misunderstood at work. So in most situations, we're taught mask your emotions, put on your game face, leave your emotions at the door, you come here, you do your job, and then you're done, right? But these behaviors also reflect what is known as emotional labor, and this is the manifestations of false impressions, and these are shown through our nonverbal behaviors, right? So I'm smiling, I'm happy, I'm leaving my problems at the door, but I have so much stuff going on in my life. And so I come in and maybe I didn't do my hair or makeup like I normally would, or I'm not as cheerful. I'm not talking to a bunch of people. I'm, looking down a lot, right? So we can really tell in these nonverbal behaviors this emotional labor that's going on. And it doesn't have to just be with work stuff. It can be with things that are going on in your life. So how do we manage our impressions in the workplace? It is impression management is individuals make conscious efforts to control the impressions that they make, right? So I consciously decide I have to control how I act, how I behave, what I do in the workplace because I want to make a good impression. So nonverbal communication is this primary way that we manage our impressions in the workplace, and it's related to our perceived efficiency and job promotions. right? So if I always have a good impression, I manage my impression very well, people think that I'm a better worker. And that can lead to more job promotions, higher titles, um, increased salary or pay, right? So we try to manage our workplace emotions a lot or impressions a lot. Women's appearance within organizations. For men, it's probably not something that you've had to think about. Men can get away with wearing khakis and a polo, or dress pants and a button down, maybe a tie, maybe not a tie. But women really have to think about their appearance within organizations. So there are favorable judgments of appearance that can contribute to other related or other unrelated positive inferences, right? So they look good, they have to be a good, they're a good worker, they're a happy person, they're a good person, things like that. It's that halo effect that we talked about earlier in the semester. Too high, or a woman that looks too good, can actually backfire. Um, so, you know, they might think that you look too good, you might not be as bright, which again, it's unrelated, so it shouldn't, but it happens. Women that are seen as, and this really happens when women are seen as too feminine for certain workplaces, right? So, trying to think. Um, Maybe if you work in a high school and you're wearing high heels every single day, that might not work for that workplace. I mean, I don't know if that's the best example, but it's something I came up with on the top of my head. And women often report that they're forced to choose between clothing that makes them seem like they can be taken seriously, or creative and social. So they can't really be creative and social and be taken seriously. So you have to be all professional or creative. And that's a choice that most men don't have to take or make, sorry. There are some credible leadership techniques. So there are 4 nonverbal strategies that we really associate with effective organizational leaders. The first being physical appearance. Does the leader dress the part? Are they dressed to be in a leadership position? Posture. Are they standing up straight? Are they slouching? Do they look like they want to be there? Vocalics. Leaders are smooth, effective talkers. Do they say ums or uhs all the time? Do they look like they're not confident in how they're speaking, or do they look like they're not confident in what they know, right? You can know everything about your topic that you're teaching on in your organization, but if you don't look confident, people aren't going to believe you. And then eye contact. Leaders effectively use good eye behaviors. So they're not staring, but they're not avoiding eye contact. There's a big disconnect on what's appropriate and what's not appropriate with eye contact. And leaders really find that good middle ground. Workplace relationships are another thing that we really deal with. And I mean, many of you have entered the workforce in some aspect. Maybe it was fast food, maybe it was retail, waitressing, something like that. Most of you probably don't have corporate experience yet, but you should still see these workplace relationships within what you have done. So the superior to the subordinate. This is the relationship with your immediate supervisor. And this is a strong predictor of satisfaction. But nonverbal communication is very important in this dynamic. If you have a good working relationship with your boss and you don't act like you don't want to be there, you don't get frustrated when they ask you to do something, or stay a little bit late, that's going to be very important with that satisfaction with your job and with your boss. And then we get into leader member exchange theory, or LMX as you might see it. Some employees are in this in group with the boss and others are out group. So if you're a fan of The Office, when D'Angelo was in the manager position, there was an in group and there was an out group. And in group with the boss means they're going to delegate things to you. They have this personal relationship with you. Others, they don't have this with, right? So they're not asking them to do things, or they're not just chatting with them when they see them. So these groups are very reflective of the differences in the behaviors shown to subordinates. So touch, proxemics, eye behaviors, things of that nature. Okay. We also have peer-to-peer relationships. Nonverbal communication can have a huge influence on how we develop relationships at work, and there are 3 types of peers that we talk about, as stated by Cram and Isabella in 1985. So the first is informational peer. These really take a short time to develop. You might have just been hired and somebody communicates with you about stuff that's related to work. You use less nonverbal behavior, so you might not stand as close and you're not really communicating about things other than work. And then you have collegial peers. So these take a little bit of time to develop. You get that work friend, right? You do talk about work, but you also let them in on your personal life a little bit. Nonverbal behaviors start to increase. So you start to be more expressive with them. You have proxemics that are a little bit closer. You might use different kinesics and eye behaviors or facial expressions with them. And then finally, you have your special peers. These can take years to develop. They don't always take years to develop, but they are the longest to develop. It's basically like a best friend at work. Nonverbal behaviors are at their most frequent and intimate. So you're using haptics and kinesics and proxemics. You're using your face, your posture, your gestures, everything with this person. You might refer to this person as your work wife or work husband, right? I'm pretty close with Stephen Kromka. Many of you have probably had him already. And in our relationship, I'm the work husband, he's the work wife, but we're like best friends in the office. I tell him everything. He knows about my relationship, he knows about my life, he knows about what's going on at work. I mean, we have all these nonverbals. He can give me a look and I know what he's thinking, right? So you begin to develop these. But of course, I didn't just come into the program and Stephen was my work wife, right? It wasn't like that. And so then, you have your relationships with your boss, you have them with your other peers, your other employees, but there's also this customer that you have to deal with. So any type of organization, you are dealing with clients, customers, and different types of people. So customers are typically aware of at least 3 nonverbal cues in a 60-second pitch. They can tell your body posture, your smiles, your eye contact, your voice, your tone, pitch. They can tell at least 3 of these that you're doing in just a minute. So, it's important to really build that relationship and start off on a good foot. There are some horror stories where customers came in and they were rude to an employee thinking it wasn't an employee, and that starts the relationship off very poorly, right? So there are nonverbal cues that are related to openness, trustworthiness, and agreeableness, and that can relate to sales effectiveness. So not that all of you are going into sales, but if you're going into marketing, or a lot of business, deals with this. How open do you seem to be based on your nonverbals? Can I trust you? And how agreeable? Are you saying things just because it's what I want to hear? Or do you actually believe them and we're just on this, wavelength where we're agreeing totally, right? So things to think about with the customers. There are some job interviews, do's and don'ts. I'm going to go through them quickly because they are very obvious. So respect the personal space of the recruiter, the person who is interviewing you. Don't go up and sit right next to them. Make sure you're looking good and clean. Take a shower. Wear nice dress clothes. Keep an even tone. You don't want to seem too excitable or too dull. You don't want to seem very passionate about something that maybe you shouldn't be passionate about. Relax, lean forward, use those haptics, make people seem psychologically close to you. And if you're unsure what to do with your hands, don't be Ricky Bobby. Don't stand like this in an interview. You can hold a pen, but typically I suggest resting your hands like this, but in your lap, because otherwise you fidget. For women, one of the biggest things well, for men too, men wear jewelry, I guess. Um, as you might know, I did pageants for a lot of years of my life, and they told us if you're going to wear a ring, don't touch it. Don't wear bracelets because you fidget with them, or don't wear them in an interview because you find yourself touching the ring or playing with the bracelet or moving it. Um, it shouldn't be a distraction to you, right? And then some don'ts. Don't do an unusual handshake. It doesn't matter if you've known this person for years or you just met them. Don't use too little or too much eye contact. Don't use out of control gestures. When I've also interviewed for pageants, like interviewed people who were competing, and I had oh god, there was this one girl, and she was just so funny, but she kept talking, and she was like going like this, and everything was big, and then her hands would just stay here, and then they start going again. I was like, oh my god, girl, calm down, right? So don't use out of control gestures. Don't lack a facial expression. So make sure you know that you are, make sure you're aware of what your face is doing and you're not doing too much or too little. Have good posture. Don't wear odd attire. I know there are some really cool sport coats that guys like to wear. Maybe don't wear that for the interview. Or if it's just got a neat pattern, that's not necessarily bad, but oh man, some of the things people have wore on doc school interviews where they have like a tie and then a bolo over it, or like we had a female wear a jumpsuit for a faculty position. I'm going to tell you now, don't, if you like wearing jumpsuits, don't wear them for um, an academic job position. I don't really know about non-academic um, positions, but when you're doing a teaching demonstration, doesn't really go over well because you're pulling it down all the time. Don't wear too much cologne, perfume, aftershave, and don't click your pen, bounce your legs, don't fidget. Okay. So really, that's all I have for nonverbal communication in the workplace. That's all I have for our lectures. So, as always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to answer anything. Excuse me. And stay cool, all you cool cats and kittens, and best of luck on the final exam. Just a reminder, the final exam is taken through eCampus. It's not a downloadable document this time. You do have to take it through eCampus, so make sure you are doing so properly. I'll send out email reminders. All right, check you later.